It started with a single drop of apple juice. My 10-year-old son, Leo, is the light of my life, but he's also a walking disaster zone. When I heard the frantic clatter of a keyboard and a sharp gasp from the home office, I didn't think betrayal. I thought expensive repair bill. I walked in to find Leo staring at my old MacBook with wide, watery eyes. A juice box lay sideways on the desk, its contents seeping into the spacebar. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I tried to wipe it, but the screen went black and then all these weird boxes started popping up. I think I broke the internet." I sighed, pulling him into a side hug. "It's okay, buddy. It's just a machine." I grabbed a microfiber cloth, frantically dabbing at the keys. As the screen flickered back to life, I expected to see his homework or maybe a Minecraft tab. Instead, the desktop was covered in hundreds of restored windows. In his panic, Leo had mashed a combination of keys that triggered a deep system restore from an old, hidden partition of the hard drive, a partition I hadn't accessed in 7 years. One folder titled "Tax Records Do Not Open" was glaring at me from the center of the screen. I didn't remember making that folder. As I clicked it, my stomach did a slow, sickening roll. It wasn't taxes. It was a digital paper trail of a life I didn't recognize. Leo stood there, still apologizing, but his voice started to fade into the background. My eyes were locked on a PDF titled "Final Settlement 2021." 2021 was the year my mother supposedly lost her house in a predatory lending scam. We had all cried together at the kitchen table. My husband, Mark, had been our rock, spending nights consulting lawyers who ultimately told us the money was gone forever. But this document wasn't a legal brief. It was a wire transfer confirmation. $450,000, the exact value of my mother's home equity, had been moved into a private investment account. The account holder wasn't a bank. It was MR Holdings. My husband's initials are MR. "Mom, you're being quiet. Are you mad?" Leo's voice broke through my trance. I forced a smile, though my face felt like it was made of stone. "No, sweetie, go play in the yard. I just need to check some work stuff." As soon as the door clicked shut, I began digging. Every file I opened was a new slap in the face. There were spreadsheets detailing my boutique's monthly losses I had struggled to cover by taking on extra shifts, but the math didn't add up. On paper, the boutique was failing. In these hidden files, the profit was being diverted, cent by cent, into MR Holdings. My husband wasn't just my partner, he was a parasite who had been slowly bleeding me dry for years. I spent the next 3 hours in a fever dream of data. By the time the sun began to set, I realized the theft wasn't just financial, it was personal. I found a high-resolution photo of a diamond necklace, a piece that had belonged to my grandmother. It had gone missing during our move 2 years ago. I had spent weeks crying over that loss, feeling like I had failed my ancestors. Under the photo was a digital receipt from a high-end auction house. It had been sold for $30,000. The buyer's name was redacted, but the shipping address was one I knew by heart, my sister Elena's apartment across town. The room felt cold. My husband stole it, and my sister bought it? Or perhaps they were in it together. I remembered Elena's sudden promotion at work that same year, the way she suddenly started wearing designer clothes and talking about her smart investments. I had been so proud of her. I had even brought her dinner when she said she was working late to celebrate. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest. It wasn't just Mark. It was a coordinated effort by the people I loved most to strip me of everything I owned while I looked them in the eye and thanked them for their support. I closed the laptop slowly. They thought I was the emotional one, the nurturer who would never suspect a thing. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, the sun felt too bright, like a spotlight on a crime scene I wasn't supposed to see. I dropped Leo off at school, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. As he hopped out of the car, his cousin, Toby, my sister Elena's son, was waiting by the gate. Toby has always been a bit of a bully, a trait I used to excuse as boyish energy, but today his smirk looked sharpened like a blade. "Hey, Leo!" Toby shouted, loud enough for the other parents to hear. "My mom says you guys are moving soon. She says we're getting your house because your dad is a genius and your mom is clueless." Leo froze, his backpack sagging. "We aren't moving, Toby. Shut up." "R2?" Toby taunted, stepping closer. "Mom said the paperwork is already signed. She said you'll be living in a trailer by summer while we put a pool in your backyard." I stepped out of the car, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Toby, that's enough," I said, my voice eerily calm. The boy looked at me, momentarily startled, then stuck his tongue out and ran toward the building. I stood there on the sidewalk, the world spinning. My sister wasn't just stealing my jewelry, she was planning to take the roof over my son's head, and she was talking about it in front of her child like it was a done deal. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with a secret bank account, I was dealing with a coordinated eviction of my entire life. When I got home, Mark was in the kitchen, humming as he made gourmet coffee. He looked so handsome, so relaxed, the picture of a supportive, successful husband. "Morning, babe," he said, sliding a mug toward me. "You look tired. Did Leo keep you up with that laptop nonsense?" I looked at the coffee, wondering if he'd been poisoning my spirit as easily as he brewed a morning cup. "Toby said something strange at school today, Mark. He said Elena told him they were buying our house." Mark didn't blink. He didn't even pause his stirring. He just let out a soft, patronizing chuckle. "Oh, Sarah, you know how Elena is. She's always had a bit of a competition complex with you. She probably had one too many mimosas and started talking big to impress the kid. You know she's struggling with her own mortgage." "Is she?" I asked, my voice level. "Because she seemed to have $30,000 for Grandma's necklace." For a split second, so fast you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it, Mark's hand tensed. Then he relaxed. "What? Grandma's necklace? Sarah, honey, I think the stress of the boutique is getting to you. You're starting to see ghosts. Maybe you should take a spa day. Use the credit card, don't worry about the balance." He kissed my forehead. It felt like the mark of a traitor. He wasn't just lying, he was trying to make me feel insane so I wouldn't trust my own eyes. After Mark left for work, which I now suspected was just a series of meetings to finalize my ruin, I went straight to his home office. I didn't look at the computer this time, I looked at the physical evidence. I spent an hour painstakingly smoothing out tiny scraps of paper I found at the very bottom of his shredder bin, pieces that hadn't quite caught the blades. It was like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. One scrap had the word foreclosure in bold red ink. Another had my signature, or what looked like it, looped and slanted in a way I never write my S. He had been practicing. But the most damning piece was a handwritten note on a yellow legal pad scrap. It was my mother's handwriting. It said, "Mark, make sure Elena gets the boutique. I want the beach house. Sarah doesn't have the stomach for the business anyway. She'll thank us when she's free of the responsibility." The betrayal had a hierarchy. My husband was the architect, my sister was the beneficiary, and my mother was the cold-blooded strategist. They had decided, as a family, that I was the weak link to be harvested. They weren't just stealing my money, they were relieving me of my life because they thought I was too soft to keep it. I looked at the scraps of paper on the floor and felt a cold, hard shell form around my heart. They wanted to see if I had the stomach for business? Fine. I was about to give them a masterclass in Hostel. I needed to see Elena. I needed to look into her eyes while I knew the truth, just to see if there was a single shred of soul left behind her perfectly Botoxed forehead. I drove to her apartment, the one I had helped her furnish when she was broke 2 years ago. When she opened the door, she was draped in a silk robe, clutching a glass of green juice. Sarah, what a surprise, she chirped, though her eyes immediately darted to my face, searching for cracks. I was just about to head to the gym. Everything okay? You look peaky. I'm fine, I said, pushing past her into the living room. I just wanted to see if you had that old slow cooker I lent you. I'm making a big family dinner tonight. As she turned to the kitchen, I scanned the room. There, sitting carelessly on the marble sideboard, was a jewelry dish. And there it was, my grandmother's diamond necklace, shimmering under the recessed lighting. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a lost item, it was a trophy. Found it, she called out, holding the dusty appliance. She followed my gaze to the sideboard and froze for a heartbeat. Then, with the grace of a professional liar, she smiled. Oh, do you like that? It's a high-quality replica I picked up at a boutique. I know how much you miss the original, so I thought I'd get one that looked just like it. Emotional support jewelry, right? I smiled back, a cold, empty gesture. It looks incredibly real, Elena, almost like it has the same tiny scratch on the clasp as the one I lost. That afternoon, I didn't go to the spa like Mark suggested. Instead, I went to a tech store 3 towns over where nobody knew my name. I bought 3 nanny cams, disguised as ordinary USB wall chargers. When I got home, I placed one in Mark's office, one in the kitchen, and one in the living room. I sat in my car around the corner, watching the live feed on my phone. Mark came home early. 10 minutes later, a key turned in the lock. It wasn't me. It was my mother. They didn't greet each other with a hug. They went straight to the kitchen island, spreading out a map of the city. The zoning board approved the redevelopment for Sarah's boutique block, Mark said, his voice dropping all the warmth he usually saved for me. The property value just tripled. My mother leaned in, tapping a finger on the paper. And the foreclosure paperwork? Is she still oblivious? She's asking questions about Elena's jewelry, Mark admitted, rubbing his jaw. She's getting twitchy. We need to move the final signing up to Friday. Once the boutique is in Elena's name and the house is under the trust, we tell her the bank made a mistake and we've lost everything. She'll be too busy crying to look at the fine print. My mother nodded, her face devoid of any maternal instinct. Good. I've already told the neighbors she's having a nervous breakdown. That way, when she starts screaming about theft, everyone will just think she's lost her mind. I felt like I was watching a horror movie where I was the first victim. But the footage wasn't over. Mark's phone rang and he put it on speaker. Hey, baby, a woman's voice purred. It was a voice that sent a shiver of recognition down my spine, though I hadn't heard it in nearly a decade. Is the clueless one out of the house? Mark smirked at my mother, who actually rolled her eyes as if the mistress was a minor inconvenience. She's out. Don't worry, Julia. Just a few more days and we're set. We'll have the cash, the assets, and we can finally stop playing this ridiculous game. I'm tired of hiding in this rental, Mark, Julia complained. I want to be in that house. I want Sarah's life, but with my name on the mailbox. Julia, my best friend from college, the bridesmaid at my wedding who had moved to Europe and cut all contact right before things started going wrong for me. She hadn't moved to Europe. She had been moved into a holding pattern by my husband, waiting for the moment they could finally discard me like trash. I looked at the phone screen, my vision blurring with rage. They had planned this for years. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was a long con. They wanted my money, my business, my home, and my dignity. But they had forgotten one thing. They had left me with the only thing that actually mattered. They had left me with the evidence. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy, like the air before a massive thunderstorm. I spent the next few days playing the clueless wife to perfection. I cooked Mark's favorite meals, laughed at his dry jokes, and pretended not to notice the way his eyes constantly tracked my movements. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting the people who were trying to bury me. Everything changed on Tuesday afternoon. Leo came running into the kitchen, holding a small silver object he'd found in the gravel of the driveway. "Mom, look! Dad dropped his work stick when he was rushing to the car this morning." It was a sleek, encrypted flash drive, the kind Mark used for high-security client data. My heart hammered against my ribs as I took it. Thanks, Leo. I'll make sure he gets it. Why don't you go finish your Lego castle? As soon as he was gone, I sprinted to my laptop. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely plug it in. I expected passwords, firewalls, and layers of protection, but Mark's arrogance was his greatest weakness. The drive was labeled simply, Exit Plan. I clicked. My eyes scanned through flight itineraries, offshore account routing numbers, and a folder titled Legal Dissolution. It wasn't just a divorce filing, it was a roadmap to my total erasure. But at the bottom of the list was a scanned document that made my blood turn to ice. It was a marriage certificate from a small courthouse in Nevada, dated 3 years before our wedding. The names on the document were Mark Robert Reynolds and Julia Catherine Vance. I stared at the screen until the words began to blur. Mark and Julia were already married. They had been married for 13 years. I pulled out my own marriage license from the fireproof safe in the closet. I compared the two. The signatures, the dates, it all clicked into place with a sickening thud. Our marriage wasn't just failing, it was a total legal nullity. He had committed bigamy. Every document he had signed as my husband, every joint loan he had taken out, every spousal right he had claimed over my boutique was built on a foundation of criminal fraud. The room felt like it was spinning. I realized that Mark didn't just want my money, he needed to legally drain me because he knew that if I ever discovered the truth, his entire world would catch fire. He was a professional con artist, and I had been his longest mark. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of a lawyer I had found in a different county, someone with no ties to our family. "I don't need a divorce lawyer," I whispered when he picked up. "I need a criminal prosecutor. I've just discovered that my life is a forgery." The lawyer's voice was calm but sharp. "Mrs. Reynolds, or whoever you are, don't say another word. Gather every original document you have. Do not let him know you know. A man who lies for a decade is a man who is dangerous when cornered." The exit plan drive had one more surprise, a set of GPS coordinates tagged as inventory storage. I followed the map on my phone, driving to a desolate industrial district on the outskirts of town. I found myself standing in front of a rusted warehouse owned by a shell company, Elena's Designs, LLC. Using a spare key I'd seen on Mark's desk, I slipped inside. The smell of dust and expensive leather hit me immediately. I flipped the light switch and my jaw dropped. Row after row of boxes were stacked to the ceiling. I opened one. It was filled with the hand-stitched silk scarves from my boutique, the ones that had supposedly been lost in shipping last month. I opened another. My grandmother's antique silver set. My son's unopened birthday presents from last year that went missing in the mail. Even my father's old coin collection. They weren't just stealing my future, they were stockpiling my past. Elena had been using this warehouse to funnel my inventory onto the black market, while Mark used the losses to justify taking out high-interest loans against the business. They were cannibalizing my life and storing the pieces here until the day they could finally sell the carcass. I stood in the center of the cold, dark warehouse and felt a strange sense of peace. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I pulled out my phone and began taking high-resolution photos of every box, every serial number, and every forged shipping manifest. They thought I was the victim of their story. They had no idea I was about to become the author of their ending. Standing in the cold warehouse, surrounded by my stolen life, I realized I wasn't just a wife or a business owner, I was a piece of evidence. I spent the next hour documenting everything. I found crates of my boutique's missing summer line, each tagged with Elena's handwriting for an upcoming private sale under her own name. But the most chilling discovery was in the back corner, a small desk with a laptop and a printer. I opened the drawer and found stacks of high-quality parchment paper. Mark hadn't just been practicing my signature, He had been using professional-grade equipment to forge my grandfather's signature, too. They were trying to redirect a trust fund that had been dormant for decades, a fund that was only supposed to unlock for Leo when he turned 18. I felt a sudden, sharp vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Mark. "Hey, babe. Mom and Elena are coming over for a unity dinner tonight. We need to discuss the family's financial crisis together. See you at 6. The unity dinner. This was it. This was the night they planned to hand me the forged foreclosure papers and convince me to sign over the last of my rights for protection. I looked at the stolen goods one last time, my eyes hardening. I wasn't going to run. I was going to serve them a meal they would never forget. I met my new attorney, Mr. Sterling, in a quiet diner 10 miles away. He looked through the photos and the bigamy evidence with a grim expression. "This is more than a divorce, Sarah," he said, tapping the Nevada marriage certificate. "This is a felony. If you confront them now, they'll destroy the evidence or flee. We need to let them commit the final act." "They want me to sign papers tonight," I told him, my voice surprisingly steady. "They think they're taking my house." "Let them think they've won," Sterling advised. "Take these." He handed me a folder of documents that looked identical to the ones Mark had been forging, but with a crucial difference. "These are revocable power of attorney forms. If you can swap them out, Mark and Elena will be signing over their own personal assets to a temporary holding trust managed by my office, under the guise of protecting you." "A legal trap," I whispered. "Exactly. They're so blinded by their own greed they won't read the fine print. They'll think they're signing your life away, but they'll be signing their own confession. I'll have the police standing by. Once the signatures are on these papers, their intent to defraud is legally sealed." I took the folder, feeling the weight of the justice I was about to serve. It was time to go home. The house smelled of roast chicken and betrayal. Mark was playing the part of the grieving husband, his face etched with a fake stress that I used to find endearing. My mother sat at the head of the table, her pearls gleaming, while Elena fidgeted with the diamond necklace she thought I didn't recognize. "Sarah, dear," my mother started, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "Mark has explained the situation with the bank. It's devastating, but we have to act fast to save Leo's stability. We've prepared some documents to move the assets into a family trust, one Elena will manage until the crisis passes." Mark slid a thick stack of papers across the mahogany table. "It's the only way, babe. I've already signed my part. Elena and your mom are ready to sign as witnesses and co-trustees. We just need your name." I looked around the table. My husband, my sister, my mother. 3 generations of my heart, all waiting for me to fall on my sword. I reached into my bag, pulling out the folder Mr. Sterling had given me. "I actually had a friend look at the draft you sent," I said, my voice sweet and airy. "I made some minor legal adjustments to ensure the tax benefits are better for Leo. I've already signed the new copies. Why don't you guys sign the witness lines now, and we can put this nightmare behind us?" Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes searching mine. I just smiled, the same clueless smile I'd worn for a decade. He grabbed the pen. "That's my girl," he said, scribbling his name. Elena and my mother followed suit, laughing as they signed away their freedom. As the ink dried on the documents, a heavy silence fell over the room. They thought they had just finalized my ruin, but I could see the greed vibrating between them. Now that they believed the prize was theirs, it was time to turn the predators on each other. "You know," I said, casually sipping my wine, "I'm actually relieved. Mark, I'm so glad you and Julia will have enough to start over. It must be expensive supporting 2 households for so long." The sound of Elena's fork hitting her plate was like a gunshot. Mark froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "What did you just say?" he stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Oh, did I say Julia?" I blinked innocently at Elena. "I meant the business. But Elena, I was surprised to hear Mark is giving the warehouse inventory to Julia as a parting gift. I thought he told you that you'd be getting the boutique's assets in full. It's a shame. There was so much profit in those silk scarves. Elena turned to Mark, her eyes narrowing into slits. The warehouse? Mark, you told me that inventory was tied up in a legal freeze. You told me I was the only one getting a cut of the retail stock. Elena, she's lying, Mark hissed, but the sweat on his brow told a different story. The alliance was cracking. My mother, ever the strategist, tried to intervene. Sarah, you're clearly confused. There is no Julia, and the warehouse is just logistics. Let's not get carried away with emotions. I turned my gaze to her, the woman who had helped coordinate my eviction. Is it emotions, Mom? Or is it the fact that Mark told Elena he was taking the beach house for himself? He mentioned you'd be happier in a smaller assisted living facility once the house is sold. He said the stairs were getting too hard for you. My mother's hand went to her throat. She looked at Mark, her expression shifting from cold calculation to sheer terror. Mark, is that true? We had an agreement. The beach house was my price for the notary work. It's a lie! She's playing you! Mark shouted, slamming his fist on the table. But the trust was gone. Elena was already pulling out her phone, likely checking her private messages or the warehouse security app. You backstabbing snake! Elena spat at Mark. I risked everything for this. I stole those heirlooms because you said we were a team. If you think you're running off to Julia with my share, I'll burn this whole plan to the ground right now. I sat back, watching the fire spread. I didn't have to say a word. Their own selfishness was doing the work for me. As the shouting match escalated, I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward them. The screen flickered to life, showing the live feed from the nanny cams. There was Mark and my mother, whispering about the forgery. There was Mark and Julia, laughing about how oblivious I was. I'm not the one who's confused, Mark, I said, my voice cutting through their screaming like a knife. And I'm not the one who's clueless. I know about Nevada. I know about the bigamy. And more importantly, I know that the papers you all just signed didn't give you my house. Mark lunged for the laptop, but I closed it shut. The police are already at the warehouse, Elena. They're looking at the stolen inventory with your name on the lease. And Mark, those documents you just signed? You didn't sign for my trust. You signed a confession of intent to defraud, and you authorized a full audit of MR Holdings. The color drained from Mark's face entirely. He looked at the folder on the table, then back at me. You swapped them. I learned from the best, I whispered. Just then, the blue and red lights of police cruisers began to dance against the dining room curtains. The Unity dinner was over, and the reckoning had officially begun. The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than the shouting that preceded it. For the first time in 10 years, Mark looked small. The mastermind was gone, replaced by a man realizing his golden parachute had just turned into an anchor. The front door didn't just open, it was an intrusion of reality. 3 officers stepped into the foyer, led by a detective I had briefed only hours before. Mark Reynolds? Elena Vance? The detective asked, his voice a flat, professional drone that cut through the expensive ambiance of the room. This is a mistake! Elena shrieked, her hand flying to the diamond necklace that was now a collar of evidence. Sarah is having a breakdown. She's delusional. We've already been to the warehouse, Ms. Vance, the detective replied, holding up a heavy evidence bag containing the forged manifests I had photographed. And we have a warrant for the digital records of MR Holdings. As the officers moved in, Mark didn't fight. He just stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. He wasn't a genius. He was just a man who had bet everything on the idea that I wouldn't love myself enough to fight back. He lost that bet. As the police led Mark and Elena toward the door, my mother remained seated. She hadn't been handcuffed yet. The detective wanted to speak with her separately. She waited until the sirens began to fade into the distance before she looked at me. There were no tears, no apologies, only a terrifying, calm resentment. "You think you've won, don't you?" she whispered. "You've just destroyed your family, Sarah. You've sent your sister to prison and left your son without a father. All for what? A few boutiques and some pride?" "I didn't send them to prison, Mom," I said, leaning over the table. "Their greed did, and as for Leo, he's better off with no father than a father who was planning to leave him in a trailer while he ran away with a mistress." My mother stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I did what I had to do to ensure we all survived. You were always too weak for this world, Sarah. You were meant to be a housewife, not a mogul. I was trying to manage your assets before you ruined them." It was the ultimate gaslight. Even now, she was trying to frame her theft as a form of maternal protection. I realized then that I could never fix her. I could only survive her. "The police will be back for you tomorrow, Mom. I suggested they give you tonight to pack a bag. Consider it the last weak thing I ever do for you." I woke up the next morning in a house that felt strangely quiet. For years, this home had been filled with the invisible noise of lies, the quiet hum of Mark's deception, and the static of my own growing suspicion. Now, there was just peace. I went to Leo's room. He was sitting on his bed playing with a small handheld gaming device. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine for the mom he knew. "Is Dad coming back?" he asked softly. I sat down next to him, taking a deep breath. "No, honey, not for a long time. There are some things Dad and Aunt Elena did that were very wrong, and the police have to help them fix it." "Was it because of the laptop?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Because I spilled the juice?" I pulled him into my arms, squeezing him tight. "No, Leo, spilling that juice was the bravest thing you ever did, even if you didn't mean to. You didn't break our life, baby. You found the key to the cage we were living in." I looked out the window at the garden. The boutique was mine. The house was mine. My grandfather's trust was safe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a character in someone else's con. I was the architect of my own future, and I was going to build something they could never touch. With Mark and Elena behind bars awaiting bail, there was still one loose end: Julia. The exit plan had listed a small, upscale rental on the north side of town. I didn't call the police this time. I wanted to see the woman who had spent years waiting for me to be discarded. When I knocked on the door, Julia opened it with a smile, likely expecting Mark. Her face went bone white when she saw me standing there. She looked exactly as she had 10 years ago, only sharper, her eyes darting toward the suitcase standing in the hallway. She was preparing to run. "Sarah," she breathed, her voice trembling. "I can explain. Mark told me you two were in an open arrangement. He said you knew." "Save it, Julia," I said, stepping into the foyer. I looked at the luxury items in her home, items bought with my boutique's profits. "Mark is in a holding cell. The police have the Nevada marriage certificate. They know you've been receiving stolen funds from MR Holdings for years. That makes you an accessory to fraud and money laundering." Julia sank onto her designer sofa, her composure shattering. "He told me he was protecting the money from you. He said you were unstable." "He said that to everyone," I replied coldly. "But here's the reality. The police are 5 minutes away. You can either hand over the offshore account access codes Mark gave you and testify against him, or you can go down with the ship. Choose fast." 3 months later, the courthouse felt like a sanctuary of truth. I sat in the front row as Mark, Elena, and my mother were let in. They weren't wearing designer clothes or pearls anymore. They were wearing the orange jumpsuits of the state. The prosecution's star witness was Julia. In exchange for a plea deal, she laid out every detail: the secret meetings, the forged signatures, and the long-term plan to leave me penniless and committed to a psychiatric facility. The gallery gasped as the recordings from my nanny cams were played on the large monitors. Hearing my mother's voice discuss my nervous breakdown as a business strategy was the hardest part, but I didn't cry. I let the anger fuel my posture. Mark's lawyer tried to argue that I was a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge, but the evidence was insurmountable. The DNA on the stamps, the digital footprints on the flash drive, and the bigamy charges were the final nails in his coffin. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Mark finally looked at me. There was no hatred left, only the hollow realization that he had lost everything to the woman he thought he could control. The day after the sentencing, I walked back into my boutique. It had been closed for months during the investigation. The air was stale, and the shelves were half empty from Elena's theft. I stood in the center of the floor where I had spent years working myself to the bone, only to have the profits siphoned away by the people I loved. But as I looked around, I didn't see loss. I saw a blank canvas. With the help of the temporary trust fund managed by Mr. Sterling, I began a total rebranding. I didn't just want to go back to how things were, I wanted to build something bigger. I hired a new team, people who were vetted, loyal, and passionate. I reached out to the local community, sharing a sanitized version of my story about overcoming betrayal and rebuilding from the ashes. The response was overwhelming. People didn't just want my clothes, they wanted to support the woman who had stood her ground. My grand opening was the biggest sales day in the history of the business. I was no longer just a shop owner, I was a symbol of resilience. A year later, Leo and I were sitting on the deck of our new home, a modest but beautiful house overlooking the valley. The old house had been sold to cover the legal fees and restitution, and I was glad to be rid of its shadows. Leo was older now, taller and more confident. He was working on a school project on his new laptop, one with a heavy-duty protective case. He looked up at me and smiled. "Hey, Mom, remember when I thought I broke the world with a juice box?" I laughed, ruffling his hair. "I remember. You didn't break it, Leo. You just cracked the shell so we could see the truth inside." My mother had reached out from prison, sending letters filled with regret, but I never opened them. Some betrayals are too deep for apologies, and some silences are earned. I had learned that family isn't about blood, it's about who stands by you when the screen goes dark. As the sun set over the hills, I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. For the first time in my life, I was standing on solid ground, and the only person holding the keys to my future was me. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for more stories.